Hey everyone, Mr. DVB here. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking all Batman films from worst to best, including the newest take on the character, The Batman, directed by Matt Reeves, and starring Robert Pattinson as the Caped Crusader himself. I have been so excited for this movie for the past 2 years. Ever since that DC Fandom trailer dropped back in 2020, this has been just my most anticipated upcoming movie. I have not been this excited for a film since probably the start of the Star Wars sequels. And I don't love the way those movies turned out, but just, by comparison, I was extremely excited for those films. So, I was very, very interested in seeing this movie. I was so excited to see this new take on the character, focusing on the detective aspects and everything like that. It just looked awesome from the trailer, so I am so happy to have finally seen it. Can't wait to go see it again. It's a really good movie. I made a review of it if you guys have not seen that. This will be diving into spoilers, but I will put a little marker on the screen so you guys can avoid me diving into anything spoiler category-wise when I talk about the new one. But yeah, that being said, let's just jump right into this ranking. So coming in last place is going to be Batman and Robin. This really shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. This is widely considered to be one of the worst comic book movies of all time, and it is. It's a terrible movie from start to finish, but at the same time, I kind of love it for what it is. It's a stupid movie. It's god-awful, but there's just so many funny, over-the-top elements about this film. They took all of the goofy, zany stuff that I do not like in Batman Forever, and they, more than doubled down on it. They tripled down on it. They quadrupled down on it. They just go over the top with this stuff. I mean, there's literally a scene where Freeze is taking a rocket up to space. He jumps out on, some kind of wingsuit, and then Batman and Robin follow him, gliding through the skies on surfboards. It's so stupid and ridiculous. There's a bunch of cartoonish sound effects. I mean, there's a crap ton of ice puns coming from Mr. Freeze. It's a bad movie. It does feel like they basically made a film to just make a bunch of toys. There's just different costumes for the characters in every scene. It's ridiculous. George Clooney as Batman's bad. He is the worst actor to, helm the cowl, or whatever you want to call it. I think he's a decent idea for a Batman, especially back in the 90s. He was, in many women's opinion, a very attractive man, and so it makes kind of sense. He can definitely play off that kind of eccentric, billionaire, suave kind of character, but it's just the writing for him's terrible. We don't really have much of him as Bruce Wayne in this movie. His Batman is very just there. There's nothing special about his performance whatsoever, and then there's obviously all of the stupid, goofy stuff. I've always disliked Chris O'Donnell as Robin. He's way too old for the role, and he's just really annoying in this movie. Don't like him, don't like the dynamic between the two of them. The villains are terrible, although I will say Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze is pretty great. I do kind of love him in this movie. His puns are so bad, and he gives the role his all. It's very over the top. It's not a good take on the character, but it's still enjoyable for what it is. Poison Ivy, on the other hand, really stupid character. She also has some kind of dumb lines, and her plan is really dumb as well, just taking over the world with plants. And then there's Bane. I don't even know how to explain him. He's just an idiot in a mask, and I mean, I don't know. It's very odd. It's a very weird movie. The effects are horribly outdated. The action's really bad. It's just not good from any standpoint. And then there's Batgirl, who is terrible in this movie. Alicia Silverstone's performance is so bad in this film. Her lines are delivered so just dry. She's so wooden in this film. It's an interesting experience. Although I will say, one thing that I do have to give this props for is that it did kind of give us Christopher Nolan. I've thought about this in the past, and if you kind of do a butterfly effect trail, Nolan's career exists because of this movie in a way, right? If this film hadn't been as bad as it was, DC or Warner Bros. Wouldn't have done a course correction with the character. They wouldn't have gone in a super serious direction and restarted everything. With Batman Begins, which Nolan directed. Because Nolan did Batman Begins, he made films like The Dark Knight, which were just huge successes, and because of that film's success, it allowed him to, basically be given a huge budget to make movies like Inception, to make films like Interstellar. Those kind of films, we do not get those very often ever. These big, super high budget original movies produced by these big studios. And he said in interviews, the only reason he really did the Dark Knight trilogy was to make himself bigger. So we have to thank Batman and Robin for essentially giving us Nolan. I think that's just beautiful. So in a way, this is an awesome movie in that sense. But yeah, it's a very bad film. Next up in my ranking is Batman Forever. Now, this is actually the most nostalgic Batman movie for me. When I was little, I loved this film. I watched it all the time. I have countless memories of watching it either on TV or VHS. I honestly don't remember. But I just watched it a ton, and I loved it. And so when I rewatched it, it did hurt me, just realizing it's not a good movie. It is a bad film for the most part. There's still elements I enjoy about it, but it's not a good film overall. I think Val Kilmer is actually quite good in the role. I think he does a very good job at Bruce Wayne. They actually do some interesting stuff with him here. And I really like his Batman. I think he plays the character well. He's good in the role, in my opinion. The movie itself isn't that great, and so he doesn't really get to shine, but I do think he gives a solid performance. Again, I've said that I don't like Chris O'Donnell as Robin. He's actually not in this movie a whole lot, but when he is, he's just annoying, and I just don't like him. And then you have the villains. Jim Carrey's Riddler, and Two-Face, played by Tommy Lee Jones, one of my favorite actors. Tommy Lee Jones gets a lot of heat for this movie. A lot of people really don't like his Two-Face portrayal. It's not good, but I honestly don't hate him in the movie. I think he's fine. A lot of people like to comment that he kind of plays the character like Joker, like he's very zany in this film. And it's true that like his split personality, like his Two-Face is very over the top and comical, but I still think he actually does like a decent job in the role. I don't hate him, to be honest. Who I don't like is Jim Carrey's Riddler, and I know a lot of people do have a soft spot for him in this movie. For me, he's just way too, it's a period of it's a piece of its time. Like he's way too 90s. His jokes are so stupid and over the top. He has a lot of really dumb scenes like Joygasm, and he's really annoying to watch in this movie, in my opinion. So I actually am not a fan of Jim Carrey's portrayal as the character. I think he's just way too over the top and goofy, and I just don't like him. The look of the movie, I think Gotham's kind of interesting here. It's not like the best version of Gotham, but it's weird how and kind of cool how there's like these skyscrapers, and then there's like bridges and stuff that cars are driving on like hundreds of feet in the air. I've always thought that kind of looked cool, like just the look of Gotham. It looks ginormous in this movie. There's some really bad CGI shots though of the city, like these flyby shots showing different buildings that are just horribly outdated. But it is interesting. The score is really good. I will say that Elliot Goldenthal has a great score, a very underappreciated score. I think the Batman Forever theme is actually really good. I think it's a very well-crafted theme. It sounds awesome, and it's not talked about enough. It's really good. I think Two-Face has a good theme as well, so there's some good stuff here. The plot for the movie is ridiculous. Riddler's plan to essentially steal people's brainwaves and make himself smarter by using like this 3D TV technology he created. It's very goofy. The movie's also extremely like loud and busy. I don't know how to explain it. It's just like whenever there's the action scenes, everything's just so damn loud and just over the top, and it's just weird to watch. It's very like excessive. Some things I forgot to mention with this movie is that there's some very odd WTF moments. One of the biggest ones is where we see how Harvey Dent became Two-Face. It was in a court setting. Maroni, threw a bunch of acid on his face, which is following the comics. But what's weird about this scene is that there's like multiple camera angles, and it's supposed to just be a news broadcast. So it's like you have one camera angle that's like super up close and slow-mo of the acid going on his face, another one of like Maroni taking the acid out, and then there's like a shot of Batman like jumping over the crowd. So it's like, I guess Batman was at court attending this hearing, and then, I don't know, it's just a very strange moment. The other big WTF moment for me is when Bruce is at the circus, and he's yelling out, like, Harvey, I'm Batman, and yet, like, Chase Meridian, who is, like, right next to him, doesn't hear this. That makes no sense, and the last thing is that there's just one scene that was very nostalgic for me when I was little, which is when when we see like Riddler's apartment and he's making his outfit. It's a very small scene, but there's just this song that plays, and I don't know why, when I was younger, I just loved that scene for some reason. It's like the most nostalgic part of the movie for me. That's just how I feel about this movie. So, as much as like I have nostalgia for it, it's not a good movie. And then there's Nicole Kidman as the love interest. She's just really horny in this movie. It's kind of a weird character. When I was little, she definitely, like, I don't know, gave me a bat boner. I don't know what to say. Like, I did when I was little. I remember finding her character very attractive. But yeah, she's very weird in this movie. Overall, though, not a good movie, but I still have some nostalgic love for it. Next up on my list is Batman from 1966. This film, while it's not, the version of Batman I like the more darky, gritty Batman. This movie, again, it's kind of lovable. It's not actually like that bad of a movie in my opinion. It's very, again, a product of its time, which is in this case the 60s. So it's even more kind of goofy and older and whatnot. But I enjoy it for that, right? Like Adam West plays Bruce Wayne in such like an over the top way when he's talking to like Catwoman and stuff, and trying to be romantic. It feels like a Shakespearean play the way he talks. All the characters, like Penguin's always making like penguin noises, Catwoman's always making like meow sounds. It's very goofy, but it's kind of fun, and I love just the humor in this movie, the very like campy, aspects to it, like porpoises that happen to swim in front of the bomb that was about to kill Batman and Robin, and then Batman says something like, "Oh, thankfully those porpoises sacrificed themselves for the greater good," like stuff like that, or obviously like the shark repellent and all these other elements. There's just so many moments in this movie that are really, really funny, and it's totally a product of its time. But it's a very charming movie. It's kind of like watching old Bond films. It just has that kind of fun 60s camp to it. Is it a great film that, like, stands on the level of, like, the Dark Knight trilogy or, like, other comic book movies nowadays? Definitely not. Like, no way in hell. But it's fun. It's a good, movie. It's a period of its time. It's a piece of its time. And I enjoy it for that. So, yeah, overall, it's an enjoyable experience, and I kind of love it. Next up on my list, probably a controversial pick for some, is going to be the 1989 Batman. I'm actually not a huge fan of this movie. I used to love it when I was younger, like I really did, but when I rewatched it, I just found myself having a lot of issues with it. I've personally always found Michael Keaton's Batman to be kind of boring. I think he's decent as Batman, but I think his Bruce Wayne is really uninteresting. They don't do much of this character, especially in this film. It almost feels like this is a Vicky Vale movie, and she's kind of like investigating Batman, and then we have some Batman stuff, because Vicky Vale, to me, it feels like a bigger character than Bruce Wayne does in this movie. It's weird the way that's done. Like the way we were introduced to Bruce Wayne through Vicky Vale meeting him at Wayne Manor. And I just find, it's not a bad decision, but I just find it weird having her as kind of like the we're seeing the film through her eyes in a way, which I've always thought was kind of odd. I do think they focus way too much on Vicky Vale, and I think Knox is his name, like her kind of friend in the media. They're like in the movie a lot, and I think it should have focused more on Bruce Wayne and Batman. But when he is there, he's good. It's a very like well designed movie, I guess, from like a production standpoint. Like the sets look great. I think Gotham looks really nice in this movie. Next to a film I'll be talking about a little bit later in this list, this is my other favorite version of Gotham, because they do a pretty good job with like the architecture and all of like the really tall skyscrapers and the gothic look of the city. Tim Burton definitely brought his style to this franchise, and I think it really worked. I think he was a good choice for a director at the time. I think, Joker as a villain is really good in this. Jack Nicholson plays, what is currently, I would say, the most comic book accurate version of the character. Not my favorite, because Heath Ledger's is just phenomenal, but I do think he gives a really good performance here as the villain. In many ways, he overshadows, Bruce Wayne / Batman. But yeah, Jack Nicholson's good here. Joker's plan is pretty basic, but it works for the movie. Him just kind of wanting to cause chaos and poison everybody with his plan at the end of the movie. The score is probably the best part, though. I think the Danny Elfman score is phenomenal. All of the themes are so damn good. A lot of it's probably, engraved in my head because of the Lego Batman video game that I played just a ton when I was little. But the main theme, like all of the themes, they're super. I could probably listen and hum all of them, like, knowing all of the beats and whatnot. It's great. It's a very, very good score. So that is definitely the best aspect about this movie, in my opinion. Even as I'm talking about it, I kind of hear like the cathedral theme in my head. But yeah, it's a fun movie overall. It's just kind of weirdly paced and put together. It feels a little dated in many ways, and the action scenes are terrible. The hand-to-hand combat scenes are very bad in this movie. For what feels like kind of a more serious, grounded film, whenever like the fist fights come in, they feel very like over the top and out of place. Like it'll be like a guy comes in with like 2 machetes and he's like swinging them around and doing front flips, and it just feels very goofy all of a sudden when everything else feels tonally much more serious. So it's kind of odd. That clash of tones doesn't really work in my opinion. But, still overall, it's an enjoyable movie. I just didn't find myself loving it on rewatch, but it's still a classic that I obviously have, some nostalgic for. Next up on my list is going to be Batman vs. Superman, in particular, the Ultimate Edition. I have not seen the theatrical cut since probably theaters back in 2016, so this is just me purely talking about the version on physical media that's an extra half an hour. It's like 3 hours long. This is a movie that is very divisive. There's a lot of people who hate it, and then there's some people who think it's like a masterpiece, especially when talking about the Ultimate Edition. A year ago when I watched this film, I loved it, but when I rewatched it like last week or whatever, I found myself having more issues with it. I still think it's a pretty damn good movie for the most part, but definitely has some, things here and there that I don't really like. Ben Affleck's portrayal of Batman, I really like. I don't think they write the character perfectly. I'm a little bit annoyed at like him killing all these people and using guns and stuff. I'm okay with him killing if they explain it in the movie, right? Like all they had to do was have a throwaway scene where Alfred talks about, oh, ever since, Robin died, you've been so like, aggressive, whatever. Obviously not verbatim. And they do kind of like hint that that's the reason because they show, Robin's suit, but it's not enough, right? Like it is still weird to me just seeing him going around blowing up cars and whatnot. And I just think guns, no matter what, is just like a no-go for Batman. That just should not be a thing. So that kind of stuff annoyed me. Superman in the movie, I don't really like that much here, actually, on rewatch. I found him kind of boring, and I just thought that Cavill's performance was kind of dry. I like him a lot more in Man of Steel and in Snyder's version of Justice League. I think he's better in both of those films. He just seems kind of here, and some of his line delivery wasn't the greatest. But no, yeah, Ben Affleck's Batman, I mean, I think he brings the physicality to the role 100%. I do think his suit, I know a lot of people love it. I think it's way too puffy. Like, I think that they really overdo the muscle padding and whatnot, and it looks kind of goofy. I love the cowl, though. But I think the warehouse seat's like peak Batman. That is such a great scene for like hand-to-hand combat. So well executed and put together. It's awesome. Like, I love that scene to death. Batmobile chase is pretty good. There's some wonky CGI here and there. My issues with the movie has nothing to do with like Batman's character besides the stuff I mentioned, because otherwise I really like, the tension and the build-up with his hatred towards Superman. My issues come from like other elements, like the forced Justice League elements. I find the USB drive thing kind of stupid. I think all of the sequences, like the dream sequences, are so out of place. I guess Batman has the superpower to like see the future. It's really stupid. Those scenes should have been cut from the movie. As cool as they are, this should not be in the film. And then the final act. Final act with Doomsday just does not work. It's way too over the top and just stupid in my opinion. I don't think it needed that. So it's a movie that like I have like mixed feelings on. I do think it's well made, well shot, and actually well written. I do like Lex Luthor's plan. A lot of people diss on Lex Luthor. I think I was looking at his dialogue, and if you had like somebody else saying these lines, like I was thinking about the Justice League animated series where Clancy Brown voiced him. I was thinking about if he was saying those lines with kind of his attitude and whatnot and the way he delivers lines, that a lot of these things could kind of just come across as like this snarky billionaire. Right, but it's just that Jesse Eisenberg plays him in such like an energetic way that it doesn't really work, and it's kind of annoying at times. But again, if they got somebody else, I think those lines could have actually worked, because I do like his plan, and I like how like smart he is and whatnot. So yeah, overall movie, I like it. It's got its issues, but I do think it's a pretty solid movie overall. I love Ben Affleck as Batman. I thought he was great. I really liked his Bruce Wayne. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to see him continue on. I would have really liked to have seen him in his own solo movie and seen him continue as the character. That being said, people who just diss on Pattinson because of that and are like, fuck this movie, restore the Snyderverse, those people piss me off so much. Like, I understand your frustration. I too wish that we did get to see more of Ben Affleck as Batman, but don't use that hatred to like go on to talk about like Pattinson's Batman without even having seen it. It's just really stupid. Anyways, I wanted to get that out of the way. Next up in my ranking is Batman Returns. So it actually surprised me that I liked this movie as much as I did on rewatch, because, again, a year ago, I would have had this below Batman 89. But, on rewatch, really, really liked it. I actually thought it did a better job with Bruce Wayne's character. I really, really like Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman here. I think the relationship between those two characters is great, because they both, get scenes together as Batman and Catwoman and as Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, and I just love that dynamic there, so I think it's really well handled. I think the movie looks really cool. The winter setting for Gotham I love. I think that's great. The architecture, like, they definitely double down on, like, the Tim Burton aspects, sometimes a little bit too much for my taste, but I do think Gotham still looks really cool. That architecture's there. There's some shots of, like, Wayne Manor, in like the snow with like these dead trees around it and the bat signal. Looks awesome. Really cool shots here and there. My issues with the movie mainly just come from like the third act. I think Penguin's plans get really stupid and over the top, but for the rest of the movie, really like it. I like how Penguin's kind of like faking his way to the top, becoming like the mayor and whatnot, and just playing the city like a harp from hell. I like Max Schreck, played by I was gonna say Christoph Waltz for some reason, but played by Christopher Walken. He's pretty good in the movie, and I don't think he's a character from the comics. But he plays like that rich energy guy who is kind of corrupt, and I liked that role. So overall, I just think it's a better written movie than Batman 89, and I think it's better paced and told. Like with 89, like I was saying, there's just something about the pacing and the way the story flows that doesn't really work for me. This movie feels more consistent and just better told, until its third act, like I said, where things get really goofy. Like, Penguin's plan is to drown all these kids in, like, toxic water. It gets foiled immediately, and then he just all of a sudden changes to, like, no, we're gonna blow up the city with a bunch of penguins. It's pretty stupid, and I think that they should have had a more thought out idea for what Penguin's character was going to do in the final act, because it does just kind of change on the fly. And even the way it's edited, it just like fades to black, and then it comes in and he's like, I am sorry, penguins, but this is what you're going to be doing now. So that kind of stuff I didn't really like, but you know, everything before the final act I think's pretty great. And again, really like the way that they write Batman in this movie. I like Bruce Wayne quite a bit more here. He's still not great, but I do like him more for sure. I think Alfred also, I forgot to mention Michael Gough as the character is really good. Very, nostalgic Alfred for me. So all those elements I really like. The action scenes are still not the greatest. I do really like the Batmobile scene where Penguin's taking over in this movie. I think that's a pretty good moment. But you know, like the hand-to-hand stuff's not really memorable. It's kind of just there. It is improved over 89. But yeah, Batman does also kill in this movie. I forgot to mention in 89 he blows up like the entire Axis chemicals. It's kind of weird. He still kills in this movie. I mean, it doesn't annoy me as much as BVS, because I think in BVS the kills are just so much more aggressive and over the top, whereas like here, I mean, I don't know. I still don't like it, but it doesn't bother me as much as it does in BVS. Overall, though, yeah, enjoyable movie. I definitely love like that kind of gothic and over-the-top Tim Burton style it has. In some moments, it doesn't really work. Like Selena Kyle, Catwoman having 9 lives is a little goofy, and I do not know why the rich, energy company has a cat as their logo on like top of the building. There's like a spinning cat head. I don't know why that's their company logo. It just is. But yeah, overall, good film. Really like it. Alright, from here on out, I genuinely have no idea to do this ranking. I'm not kidding. I was thinking about it after coming out of the theater. I just don't know how to continue this video, right? With the Batman versus the Dark Knight trilogy. It's kind of impossible for me right now. So I'm just going to talk about the Batman here and dive into some spoilers. I will have a pop-up when I actually do get into the spoilers. I'll give my general thoughts first. But yeah, I mean, I might just make a comment like after I see the film a second time, kind of saying where I would rank it, because it's very difficult for me to do. The Batman, though, I freaking love this movie. It is great. I mean, I've been so pumped for this, like I said, for the past few years, and this gave me definitely, like, the version of Batman I've always wanted. Just the world's greatest detective. It's him, with, Alfred, with Gordon, solving these crimes, putting together Riddler's ciphers, finding out who the next target's going to be. The movie is dark. It is gritty. It is the darkest thing DC's done since Watchmen. It's, in my opinion, it's darker than the Dark Knight trilogy by far. Like, a lot of people talk about, the Dark Knight being a dark movie. This beats that easily. This film is gritty, and at times it did feel like it was R-rated. Like, there was some moments where I was, for me, it was, really intense, and I was like, oh god, this is a lot. And, some of my favorite movies are films like Seven. I freaking love Silence of the Lambs, one of my favorite movies of all time. Movies like Zodiac. This felt like those movies combined with a little bit of Saw because of, the traps and stuff, and then with Batman, right? It's just a super dark thriller where, all these political figures are being killed, and they are, put in these elaborate traps. Like, you have the film just, even for me, got, really dark and kind of eerie, honestly. Like I said, it felt like a horror movie at times with Riddler's traps and whatnot. That kind of stuff, I was like, damn, this is dark. So I really like those elements. The action scenes, there's not as many of them as I would have expected, but when they're there, they're great. I mean, a lot of the hand-to-hand ones are very quick, in the sense that, Batman just beats the crap out of these guys quickly and it's done, which makes sense. He's supposed to be this unstoppable force. But the Batmobile chase is freaking amazing. That was top tier stuff. Super well shot, just really exciting. The score by Michael Giacchino is phenomenal. I forgot to mention it in my review, but I think this is a great score all across the board. The main theme, just that intense build-up to Batman coming in, is great. Really like the way they started off the movie with that murder, and then the narration by Bruce talking about how he becomes the shadows. Criminals at nighttime, they see the darkness. They don't know where Batman is. He could be anywhere, and I love that. That is the essence of Batman right there. They do it so well. So all that stuff was just handled beautifully. Paul Dano as the Riddler, awesome. I mean, he doesn't have as much of a physical appearance in the movie, because a lot of time you see him, it's him on live streams or in calls and stuff, but he just brings so much to the role. He nails that like eerie serial killer voice. He definitely feels like there's this completely insane person. He completely delivered on the performance. I thought he was excellent. So he was definitely one of the highlights of the movie, in my opinion. Definitely, I would say the best comic book villain we've had since the Dark Knight trilogy. I thought he was truly like phenomenal here. Catwoman, played by Zoe Kravitz, really liked her. She definitely has the most depth out of any of the actresses to play Catwoman, and the most of a storyline. Whether or not I like her more than Michelle Pfeiffer is hard to say. They're both really good. They're both very different. But I do really like her. She definitely feels like a more grounded, realistic version of the character and how she kind of would be in real life. So really liked her. Penguin, played by Colin Farrell, really good in this movie. Very funny is not the right word, but if there's any character who's supposed to be somewhat funny in this movie, it's him. It's not a funny movie though. It's like some would say joyless film. But Penguin's character is, he definitely had like the humor, if there was any in the movie. And I did like Colin Farrell's performance a lot. And then Gordon, great in the movie. Loved the dynamic between him and Batman, going out and solving these riddles. Just felt like the most of a duo that those two have had in any films. I still think, for me personally, that the best Gordon is and like always will be Gary Oldman. He's just like the essence of that character. But really liked the way they handled those characters here. So all the characters are just really well handled. The only one who I thought could have been used a bit more was Alfred. I did like the relationship between the two of them, but it didn't feel explored enough, and he doesn't have that like charm of the Alfred in the Dark Knight trilogy, played by Michael Caine, who will never be beaten, period. Nobody can beat Michael Caine's Batman, or Michael Caine's Alfred. He's just perfect. But yeah. Okay, that is my non-spoiler stuff. I know I talked about the movie still quite a bit, but I'm going to dive into... 26 minutes. I'm going to dive into the spoiler category now, so... Alright, so diving into spoilers. The traps were so eerie. That one where the guy had the cage on his head, and the idea, I think, was that the rats were going to end up, eating his eyes. That's kind of how it seemed to me. That, when I was watching that scene where that call's going on, I was just like, holy shit, this is crazy. The thumb drive part was really cool. All that stuff. I just love that really dark, gritty detective movie feel that this film had. It was great. The final act, some people complained about it. I heard that that's kind of the issue for some people is the final act. I really liked it. I thought it felt deserved. It was kind of building up for some big action scenes. So having, Catwoman and Batman go and take on all of these Riddler goons while the city's being flooded, I personally really liked it. It felt like at the end of this movie, Batman is now seen as a hero, which I really like. Because for all of the movie, he is this terrifying figure who criminals fear and even general citizens fear. But at the end of this movie, he has become a hero and a symbol of hope and whatnot. And I really liked that. I liked how, well, it's not an origin movie. It kind of is in a way in that sense. So I liked that. I really liked the way they wrote all of that. So overall, just an excellent movie. Loved it and can't wait to see what they do in the future with this version of the character. Alright, so next up is going to be Batman Begins. Now, this is the only film in the Dark Knight trilogy where I think the Batman could potentially beat it, but I don't know yet. I would not put it above the next two on this list, though. But as for Batman Begins, I think this is the best comic book origin film of all time. I mean, this is how you handle it. I love the way the story is told by having, Bruce Wayne... Because we've never actually had a Batman origin movie before, if you really think about it. We've seen his parents die in other films, but we've never seen how he became the Batman. In the other films, he just already is the character. Here we actually see him going through his training. There's a lot of, him talking about what Batman's going to mean as, a symbol to strike fear into the criminals of Gotham. So I love that. All of that stuff is just so well done. And handled. So I really, really like the way that they just write Bruce Wayne as Batman. I think this is the best writing for the character that we've had in live action, in my opinion. I think that Pattinson's Batman is probably my favorite, just the way he acts and whatnot, but I still think Bale's is the best written because he's had more of an arc and stuff, whereas, with Pattinson's Batman, he doesn't have a huge arc in the movie per se. I guess him becoming a hero was more of a hero was kind of the arc there, but there is more depth to Bale's Batman for sure. So I don't know if necessarily Pattinson's going to be my favorite version of the character yet, but I think he could be over time. But yeah, I mean, I love this movie. Like I said, the origin stuff is just perfect here. It's so well done. This also has a really solid story. Like, of the Dark Knight films, this has the most of a comic book story, I would say, just in the sense of, like, using that water evaporator thing that they have to basically cause, like, all of the water to shoot out as like gas, or like as steam I should say, into the city, but then the water has been mixed with Scarecrow's hallucinogen, so people will be breathing in the toxins and it'll just cause the city to be plunged in fear. Really cool storyline, really like that. As for the villains, Ra's al Ghul, excellent. Really, really like him. He's not in the movie a ton until the final act, but when he's there, he has a great presence, and Liam Neeson sells the role completely. Scarecrow is my personal favorite Batman villain of all time. Not in live action. I do really like him in this movie, though. I think Cillian Murphy plays the role very well, so I do really like the character here. And I would love to see him done again in the future. But yeah, really like him here. I think the way they handle him visually is really, really cool with like the burlap bag. Very grounded take on the character, but I really liked it. I think the best part of this movie for me, though, one of the best parts is, like I said, it's the origin elements, but then the relationship between Bruce and Alfred. I love it. It's so great. Just their on-screen presence together, I love it. It's definitely the best relationship the characters have had. And Bale as Bruce Wayne is just awesome. So I really love him in this movie. I think like the more I'm talking about Batman Begins, I probably would put this above the Batman for right now. So I think the Batman would be my number 4. But yeah, I mean, they're all great. Like those top 4 are all like 10 out of 10 movies for me, pretty much. Not entirely sure about the Batman yet. I do have to watch it again, but I do love it. But yeah, no, Batman Begins. I mean, the action scenes, that's the thing that's interesting, is that like the fight scenes, the hand-to-hand ones, are pretty quick cut and choppy, so they're not great, but it doesn't really bother me because the movie's just so well told and so well written. I love the Tumbler chase, though. Tumbler chase is excellent. So great movie overall. Zimmer's and James Newton Howard score, excellent. In second place for me is going to be The Dark Knight Rises. Now, this movie gets a lot of hate. I think it's, one of those situations where it's a vocal minority, but I do see a lot of people who just don't like Dark Knight Rises and consider it like Nolan's worst movie, which I personally do not feel that way at all, as you can tell by being my second favorite Batman film. I love this movie. For the longest time, it actually was my favorite, but in recent years, as my appreciation and look on film in general has kind of changed, I have grown to like Dark Knight more, but I still think Rises is phenomenal. I think this does such a fantastic job at capping off this trilogy from an emotional standpoint. I mean, the last 20 minutes of this movie, or the last 10, whatever, are phenomenal. Like, could not have picked a better way to end this trilogy, in my opinion. Love it. The way they send off Bruce's character is absolutely perfect. And I really like the way they write Bruce in this movie. He's not, in the suit a whole lot in this movie, which some people complain about, but I'm kind of okay with it because to me it's like this trilogy, Bruce is the main character, not really Batman. Like, it's about Bruce and his journey and whatnot. And so in this movie, I love how he's rising back from, Harvey Dent's, death and that kind of stuff, and how that affected him in the city. And then this has my favorite scene in the trilogy as well. The part where he climbs out of the pit while that score is building up, he makes that jump. That scene is so phenomenal. Like, it's such a great scene, by far my favorite part of the trilogy. And people complain about it, not necessarily that scene, but they're like, well, how did he get back to Gotham? What are they supposed to do? Go from that scene and then cut to him, like, at an airport, and then he, like, parachutes into Gotham? Like, he's Bruce Wayne. He has ways of, like, doing these things. I think that plot hole is so stupid that people consider it an issue. Bane as the villain. Love him. He's up there with Heath Ledger's Joker for me. I mean, not as good as Heath Ledger's Joker, but he's my second favorite comic book villain. I think he is heavily underrated. A lot of people complain about the voice. I think he sounds awesome. I think he has some great lines. I absolutely love his monologue when he's talking to Bruce in the cell about how, this is like this pit kind of like gives them like hope or whatever, but like false hope because they can't make it. That whole conversation talking about how when Gotham is ashes, then he has, his permission to die. That scene is just brilliant. So well written. I love Bane in this movie. He achieves what Joker was going for. I think he's excellent. I do hate his death, though. I think his death is absolutely stupid. That joke with Catwoman, blowing up him, I'm fine with it. It could have been used on, like, some thug, but having it used for Bane is so anticlimactic. I think a better death would have just been if, his mask is ruined or whatever, and Talia chooses not to, like, help him or whatever, so he kind of dies from his broken mask. and it's kind of like a betrayal, showing that she really only cared about her father's work. I think something like that would have been way better than just him getting shot like that. It's really stupid. And speaking of Talia, I don't really like her as a character. She's a pretty weak aspect of the movie, in my opinion. Marion Cotillard is normally a great actress, but she's just not good in this movie. Do not think her performance is that great. And her death is just terrible, and she just goes like that. Very bad acting on her part. Which is the same, because like I said, she's normally very good. Like, she's won an Oscar. She's a good actress, but just not in this movie. Catwoman, played by Anne Hathaway, really like her. Again, I think all versions of Catwoman we have had, besides maybe like the 60s one, I think they're all really good, like in their own way. They all play the character differently. Really like Catwoman here, though. I think Anne Hathaway plays her quite well. And again, great score. Probably my favorite score to the trilogy. It's just really epic and grand. The final act is pretty great. There's some questionable choreography in this movie, but I do think some of the action sequences are still amazing. In particular, the Bane versus Batman fight in the sewers is great. It's raw, it's gritty, really like it. Again, some great dialogue there. So overall, awesome movie, but I just love the ending so much. I mean, the scene with Alfred, where he's at Bruce's funeral talking to like Martha and Wayne and Thomas's headstones, and he's like, "I failed you," that almost gets me like a tear every time. It's so sad. But then just that ending where Bruce actually survived, and he is, at that cafe with Selina, and he's kind of finally, gonna start a family, whatever, and Alfred sees that. It's just perfect. It's a beautiful ending for the character. And then Batman still lives on, like, that, him as a symbol still lives on, because now, Joseph Gordon-Levitt John Blake, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is going to take on that mantle. Love that. I know the Riddler, or sorry, not the Riddler, the part where he's like, "Oh, my name is Robin," that part's a little goofy in my opinion, the way it's written, but I do like the idea of it. And I just think it's a very strong ending. So, awesome movie, love it to death, and I think it's very underrated. And finally, we come to my number one spot, my favorite Batman film, my favorite comic book film of all time, The Dark Knight. This movie is a pure masterpiece. There is not one issue with this movie, in my opinion, from start to finish. I think it's phenomenal. I mean, I guess you could like nitpick little things like some of the choreography, or like just like the way the fist fights are done not being the greatest, but it's just because everything else in the movie is so great, I could give two craps about those things not being like the best action scenes ever, because the movie is just so well written. That is one thing I'll say about the Dark Knight trilogy. The dialogue is phenomenal in this series. In particular, this movie. The writing is just top-notch here. Perfectly paced movie. Like, it does not feel like 2.5 hours from start to finish. It's just so well put together. The characters are phenomenal. I love Bruce Wayne in this movie. I think Christian Bale does not get enough props for how good he is in this movie. I think the Batman voice is overdone, but I do think he's really good here. I think that Joker, played by Heath Ledger, is incredible. Best villain of all time, in my opinion. He's just amazing. There's not really much to be said that hasn't already been said before. He's just incredible in this film, and I love him in this. Just so many like minor things he does with the role that I love, like his little like lick thing that he does, or like his clap when Gordon becomes commissioner. He has so many amazing sequences when he grabs the drink at the party and like spills all of it and then like pretends to drink the rest of it. Just great, so well put together. And then there's that interrogation scene, which is just one of my favorite scenes of all time in any movie. So he's incredible in the role. He obviously is the highlight of the entire movie, but everybody else is still great. Still love Alfred, still love all those guys. Gordon here is awesome. Again, another phenomenal ending. Probably my favorite opening to a movie ever. I think that whole bank robbery scene is so great, just puts you right into the action. Probably the best opening of any movie, in my opinion. So yeah, I love it. Harvey Dent slash Two-Face, played by Aaron Eckhart, is great as well. Very underappreciated and not talked about much. But I do think that Harvey Dent in Two-Face, like, while he's not as Two-Face for that much in the movie, he plays a huge role in the film because he's essentially what the entire plot is about, right? Like, he's the reason Dark Knight Rises exists because of, what he stood for and whatnot. And I just love that decision at the end of the movie where Bruce decides, no, Batman's gonna take the blame for all this. It's great. So, love the movie. I think it's a masterpiece. One of the best movies of all time. In my top 5, probably top 3, honestly. Like, it's just that good. And there you have it. That is my ranking for all the Batman films. So, The Batman currently ranks at number 4 on my list. Could change with a rewatch. It will not drop. There's no way it's dropping. It's definitely top 4 no matter what. With a rewatch, could it move it to number 3? Maybe. But as of right now, it's number 4. Just a great movie, though, and I'm glad it lived up to the hype. So there you have it, guys. That is my ranking. Very, very long video. My throat's actually legitimately sore, but yeah, I mean, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you like the Batman. Let me know what you think of it down below, like I said, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.